Let's turn now to federal politics. Joining me is Fitzpatrick and Co-Advisory Managing Director Eamonn Fitzpatrick, a long-time Labor advisor, and DPG Advisory Founding Director and a long-time Liberal advisor and strategist David Gazzard. Eamonn, first to you. You're at the Press Club today. I want to talk about Jim Chalmers' speech in a moment, but on the Prime Minister, his meeting with Donald Trump, it didn't happen. We're now seeing and hearing from Penny Wong. She was on the program a few minutes ago saying that the PM is considering going to NATO next week to have discussions about where the world is at. It's a precarious moment, but also trying to land that meeting finally.
Yeah, and look, I think, if he does, that's exactly what needs to happen at this time. Having said that, Kieran, things are changing by the hour. I think it's pretty understandable that when you're dealing with a long-time partner and they are having to manage the biggest crisis that's happened globally for some time, it's understandable that they might be just a little bit focused elsewhere. Having said that, it was still a great opportunity for our Prime Minister to meet with a lot of his contemporaries on that world stage. And he's got great relationships with all of them. I mean, I would just say we've got to watch this situation emerging hour by hour. And it's just rolling along, right through the day, right through. We could be in a very different position by tonight. I think we all understand that. And that's the whole point of having to have a pretty solid ground for your foreign affairs policy, your relationships, and just understanding how things work. And I think, as the Prime Minister said, we just got to be a bit grown up about this and just understand if the meeting didn't happen, there's a pretty good reason why.
Yeah, and David Gazzard, I think you would agree with that, having yourself been in the Prime Minister's offices at moments of crisis.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think it's fairly churlish to blame Anthony Albanese for Donald Trump leaving the G7 early because he's managing a crisis back in Washington, D.C., while the Middle East continues to spiral out of control, depending on which way you look at it. I do think what it does is contextualise where Australia finds itself in the world pecking order, vis-a-vis some of these other countries. Australia used to be the United States' staunchest ally, went into a variety of theatre of wars and managed to steer itself through a range of other trade imbroglios and come out on the right side of things. But, does Anthony Albanese need to be flexible in the way that he seeks to engage with Donald Trump? Yes. Should he go to NATO if it requires that? Yes. May it be the case that Donald Trump switches again? We'd have to deal with that then, but that could be the case then.
Eamonn Fitzpatrick, you're at the Press Club today. Let's turn our attention to domestic policy, and the Treasurer saying that he's trying to build consensus with that productivity roundtable later in the year. Is there a sweet spot where you can bring business and the unions together and get some real action this term?
Well, I think there is, and I think we've got to see the work he's been doing and the government's been doing in the context of 2 terms. I mean, you look through, he had a very well-defined strategy going into term 1. They were dealing with, and he outlined them, and we're still dealing with the fallout from some of those big shifts, right? So we're talking about, going to fragmentation, the rise of renewables, going to AI, an ageing population. So it's a continuation of that. You look at his employment white paper and things like that. So this roundtable will simply be one ongoing part of that. Now, they've consulted pretty widely right through, I think, term 1. They've got those relationships, and now he needs to really outline the urgency of what is happening to us and the urgent need to sort of look after people. And it's the same struggle wherever you are in the world. Everyone's got exactly the same challenges, I have to say. But we're going to have to pay for a way to look after ourselves and give people the services that they actually need. And I've got to say, too, when you look at how they did it, they looked after a lot of people in term 1 who had been basically forgotten. So they've got a level of comfort now in terms of inflation. They've got people just breathing just a little bit easier for the most part. And now they're in a pretty good position to move to that next stage, which is what he's doing. They've gone from inflation to productivity. And that's the only way you can address that, is making sure people get looked at.
David Gazzard, I think there's a real case here for the coalition to take a leaf out of the Howard playbook back in the 80s and to a certain extent the 90s, but certainly during the 80s period of reform of the Hawke-Keating government, where John Howard lent into a fair bit of that and got, I think, you get a bit of credibility by being constructive and saying, look, this is for the national interest. Let's get some proper tax reform in place and we'll support it.
That seems to be where it's going, Kieran, and I think it is required at the moment. The opposition now finds itself looking at a bare minimum 3 years, possibly 6 years in opposition. There is clearly a room for a tax agenda. My Labor sources tell me that Chalmers is going to start that conversation today and start talking about reform. Now, reform means many things to many people. In some cases, people want to just raise taxes to fill in the fiscal gap. Others will want to use it as a tax mix switch where you just take from some, give to the others. But there is a definite place to have a debate here around tax, driving the country forward, reforming things, making things work more efficiently and better in the way that John Howard and Peter Costello did it with the introduction of GST and wiping out a range of other taxes that were hampering economic growth, and the country leapt forward. So the coalition is certainly saying, I saw Senator Patterson over the weekend saying that they were willing to engage on tax reform, which supports your theory, Kieran. And I think there's a place for a discussion to drive this debate forward, but I think it will have to be in the latter area where we're making a more productive Australia. That agenda is there. We've got to go forward. There's a huge fiscal hole to fill in, and probably one of the only ways we can fill that is by making the country work harder and work better and grow the pie, as opposed to taxing some to fill in that massive gap.
Would that be the aim of Jim Chalmers, Eamonn, to try and get that bipartisanship? Because when the coalition does return to office, as it inevitably will at some point down the track, it's much better for them to have those the structural guardrails in place in a budget sense to see things back on track, because they're going to have to deal with the budget crisis if it's not.
Look, Jim Chalmers is a guy, I know him well. He's never turned down a good idea. So I think actually it's just on the opposition. Are they organised enough? Do they really want to buy in? Are they happy to sort of make a genuine contribution rather than try and play politics? They've got that opportunity. They've got a new leader. So that is sitting right there for them. Again, I would just say to people, the pattern of behaviour of this government has been to sort of talk to people all the way along. And I can't see that changing here. In fact, I think that'll actually be more important. And we've got to remember too, in terms of being at this point in history, AI is transformational, and it's the thing that this government and governments right around the country this year will really sort of, I think, turn their attention to. Not just in terms of delivering public services, but also how they grow the economy, because it will be transformational. So I think we'll hear him talk a little bit about that today. In fact, he walked past us just a few moments ago. It's pretty cool out here in Canberra, but it's cold. But inside, I reckon it's going to get pretty warm, depending on what he has to say.
Yeah, it is. It's a beautiful, chilly Canberra day, that's for sure. But David Gazard is, we talk the economics. Let's talk the politics as well with Jim Chalmers. He's the heir apparent. I think Richard Marles and Jim Chalmers very close in terms of who might be next. It's a long way down the track, you would imagine, but it's never too far away, is it? The politics and the ambition when you're talking about people like the Treasurer or the Deputy Prime Minister and others.
Look, if Chalmers takes on, and I think he should, the debate around tax reform and introduces meaningful reform, it does not come without significant pain. There are only three real major areas to introduce tax reform. One is income tax. We'll do that at your life-threatening risk. The other is consumption, and of course we've got the GST. GST may have to rise, but it all goes to the states. The last is savings, and Chalmers has started to edge out into the stream with this unrealised capital gains tax, which isn't going well. Or you have to find a way of lifting some while cutting others to make the economy go better. So you're potentially lowering income taxes to drive, lowering corporate taxes to drive animal spirits, to get business working harder. So these are all difficult things because there are winners and there are losers. I remember campaigning with John Howard around the GST campaign. It was a scarifying experience, but ultimately the coalition won through, and the country grew as a result of that. Even though it was a pretty tricky debate to manage at the time. So, you know, good on Jim Chalmers if he's going to have a go in this area, but it does come with political risk. If he can manage it, he will really lift himself head and shoulders above the pack in terms of becoming the next leader.
Good point, Gaz. Eamonn, appreciate it.